They're the oldest pure breed in the world. When the Romans invaded England, they described the Devon. And that was a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And so they've been around ever since, but they have not changed.
Some publications that I've read credit the Devons, the Red Devons in England, as you say, they were there when the Romans invaded, as having their roots back in the Middle East region in the days of the Bible, and they would be descendants of the red cattle mentioned in the Bible.
Yes.
Which would put, back at least a couple thousand years.
Yep.
But they've been in England, that we understand, since at least the Roman invasion, probably before.
Before that, I've heard that they come in from the Middle East and maybe some blood out of Africa. When they started sailing and traveling, for different things around the world, they brought these cattle back, and that's how they come into England, which is right on the coast, Devonshire, Sussex, is it Middlesex, whatever it is, right there on the coast.
Which is probably why they traveled, is because they're such a hardy breed, which we know today, and that's one of the reasons they were selected to come to America early on, because of their hardiness, and we'll get to that later. But Devons were known in England as a middle horn breed. You've got your short horns, you've got other breeds with shorter horns. Devons qualify, even though today we think of them as having large horns, as a middle horn breed, because some of the other English breeds, like your Sussex and so on, had much larger horns.
Yep.
And of course we know Texas Longhorns have larger horns.
Yep.
But Devons were considered a middle horn breed, which you don't hear. That's only in old references in England about that. But they, very nice horns, but still considered as only middle compared to the Sussex. Now Sussex oxen, I've seen them. I've seen pictures that they were imported a lot over into eastern Canada, Nova Scotia, and so on, because of similar climate as Canada developed in population. Similar climate to Sussex, where they come from. But some people speculate that the Sussex is a breed that grew out of the Devons as well.
As the Canadian.
Yeah. Well, eventually morphed into the Canadian, yes.
Yep.
Yep. As I tell people that ask me questions about the Devons at farmers markets and other places, the Pilgrims came into Plymouth in 1620. 100 people came on the Mayflower, and 50 died the first winter because of disease and other issues, starvation maybe, freezing. They didn't have substantial buildings, they didn't have anything. 1621, another boat came with another 100 folks, but no animals. So because the Pilgrims didn't have any communication, cell phones and so on, to get back to England, they sent word back with the ship captain and a few people they sent back. We need animals here to sustain us: chickens, pigs, cows, goats, sheep. So the third boat, 1623, I believe it was called Charity, brought animals to the New World, into Plymouth. And among those were the red cattle from the south of England, which we know today as American Milking Devons. They were selected probably because of the hardiness we were discussing in England, how tough they are. Because if you envision Plymouth in 1623, there wasn't much there, right? There were no veterinarians, there were no barns, there was no alfalfa.
Nothing.
There was no cultivated fields other than a little bit of Indian corn the Pilgrims had tried to grow. And the cattle had to survive on that. Cattle is like turning cattle free in the woods today, pretty much.
They have a very gentle temperament. You wouldn't want a Brahma bull pulling your wagon across the prairie. So they were the animal of choice for the immigrants that went across the United States. If they had a choice, they would choose Devon, because Devon are very docile. They're very quiet. I've read that in the Chicago area in 1890, 30% of their animals, their oxen, were American Milking Devons. So they were very popular among people that had a choice in choosing a breed of oxen.
In one of the Devon herd books in England, I've read in the past that Devons were favored for beef, and favored so much so that at auctions and sales, they would be bought by meat purveyors to take to London for the upper class.
That's
and
right.
they were never sent to the Navy to feed the Navymen. Now, the British Royal Navy was the worldwide force in those days,
Yeah.
and consumed a lot of beef. And they did a lot of salted beef or barreled beef and so on. But that was usually never Devon's. It was always something else, because Devon's was considered the finer quality of beef in those days in England.
In those days, the royal family would eat nothing but Devon beef. Prince Charles still has a herd of Devons. All right.
The American Devon Cattle Club always had their annual meeting in Springfield, Massachusetts.
And there was a bus that went up, all right? It took a lot of them up. Because like my grandfather didn't drive.
Right.
So the bus was out of New Haven, all right? The railroad owned the bus company, all right? And they would take a bus up. Well, they went up to the meeting and they were registering polled cattle.
Right.
Well, horns are recessive. So in order to be polled, there got to be something else in there. So they got upset and left and did not register, okay, with them anymore. Well, some of them did, but some of them didn't, okay?
Well, the American Devon Cattle Club, as they call themselves, would register any Devon, whether
Yep.
it was a milking Devon like we have or
Beef Devon.
And that had been historically the way they did things for years. And if you
Yep.
look in their herd books and their publications, they would promote people like my grandfather and the Carpenters and the Beardsleys, but they also would promote all these big beef Devon operations. And there were places in the South, Mississippi and out west and Oregon and all over Missouri. Missouri had one of their members on the board of directors.
Yeah,
That would have hundreds
that's right.
of the beef Devons. But that association considered all Devons under the one umbrella.
That's right.
But as you're talking about in '55, they started with not only with the polled, because the beef Devons at that point still had horns. The bulls did in the
Yep,
books and
yep.
all that. And they were going to allow a breed-up program or whatever they wanted to call it, where you could start to register
Genetic recovery.
genetic recovery, where you weren't registering 100% purebred animals. And like you said, a lot of those old Yankees that we talked about had been chugging along selling oxen didn't agree with that at all.
No.
Left that meeting and pledged never to go back, and didn't.
I had a fellow from North Carolina call me. He just called me yesterday. That bought a couple of cows from Gurney Davis. He's looking for a bull down there. He's somebody local. And he's got a few acres, and again, it's just enough milk and meat for his family. All
Well,
right?
that's always been the Devon's strong point. That's their forte. I mean, from the days in Plymouth, they sustained small families with
Exactly.
milk and meat and labor, and that's what they're doing today on these small farms and sustainable farms and
They're-
back-to-earth farms. They're the excellent cow that's tailor-made for that.